Hello, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Shankar Kurra. I'm the Vice President of Medical Affairs at Monument Health Rapid City Hospital. I'm an internist, board certified in internal medicine, also a fellowship in geriatrics. And we will be talking about misbeliefs, misconceptions, myths surrounding the disease COVID-19 today. So COVID-19 has been around for a little over 2 years, began late 2019, and it is caused by the virus SARS coronavirus number 2. So let's take a brief look at origins. This one is the most harmful myth of all. What it sets back is research and our ability to understand and therefore prepare for future pandemics. So the origin of this coronavirus called SARS-2, the original SARS, if you will recall, was 2003 and also came from bats. The question about whether it is a lab leak or is it zoonotic. A zoonotic disease is one that spills over from an animal reservoir where it normally circulates and becomes a human disease by effectively being transmitted from person to person. The best scientific evidence shows a strong, more than 99.9% likelihood that this coronavirus, just like the first SARS, spilled over from a bat species into an intermediate host and then on to human beings. The best research done so far identified 3 in the region of Laos that have similarity to the current SARS virus that they found in bats with a single amino acid difference between the spike protein of that virus and the human coronavirus that's currently circulating as a pandemic. So just to summarize, the evidence is strongly in favor of a bat origination, and which is pretty much every single human disease we know today have been a spillover from an animal species. So the myth about it being created in a lab is extremely unlikely. One other myth that is pervasive is COVID vaccines being unsafe. And the fact that how could a vaccine so successful be created in a very short time? What is hidden behind this remarkable period of time when, because of $10 billion vested by the United States government under Operation Warp Speed, this was possible because research requires expensive funding. But what is really hidden is the fact that there's over 30 years of basic science research that led to the success of the messenger RNA vaccines. In this slide, I'll start from the top left. The picture there you see is Drew Weissman and Catalin Carrico. These are the 2 researchers who worked on this paper that they published in 2005, which is shown in the middle of this slide on the top. What this research of 10 years before they could arrive at this successful use of a modified RNA to help our immune system. So this paper, when published, was recognized immediately by the researchers and scientists in the bottom left of your screen. Dr. Sahin and Dr. Turecki in Mainz, Germany, who then went on to found BioNTech in 2008 in order to use this breakthrough, groundbreaking research. And at the same time, in 2010, Derek Rossi and Bob Langer of Moderna founded Moderna. The company didn't exist prior to this, and this was established in Cambridge, again, to exploit this finding. So that's how the messenger RNA technology was born. 10 years of research followed by, from 2005 until 2020, another 15 years of research, of doing prototype research to create a proof of concept and get ready. And they were primed and ready for this pandemic. On the extreme right of this slide is another very important story to this, which goes back all the way to the 1960s and 70s, when an attempt was made to make a vaccine to cure or to prevent respiratory syncytial virus, or RSV, which is a common infection among children. This research was led by the NIH, mainly by Barney Graham, who you see in the top right of this image. And when they made this vaccine for RSV, it was an abject failure. And they spent the next 2 decades trying to understand why their vaccine failed. What they found is what is the other part of the story that led to the successful messenger RNA vaccine. At the bottom right is Jason McClellan, who's holding a 3-dimensional shape of the spike protein. What the researchers at NIH under Barney Graham discovered was the vaccine for RSV failed because the protein they used to inform the immune system to make antibodies against RSV exists in 2 or 3 three-dimensional conformations, and they just happened to choose the wrong conformation. But it took a long while. It seems obvious on hindsight, but in hindsight it may appear that way. But the reality is they had to do a lot of fundamental research to understand why does the 3-dimensional shape matter. So that research then, when late 2019, COVID emerged, early 2020, the Chinese scientists had posted the genetic information of this virus. Barney Graham and Jason McClellan immediately went to work and identified the correct 3-dimensional shape of the spike protein needed to elicit neutralizing antibodies. And this is another part of the story. So all in all, over 30 years, and multiple scientists, not just the ones you see on the slide, were responsible for the true success of these vaccines. So there was no rush or some magical way that this vaccine appeared. This is hard, fundamental scientific research over 30 years. Do vaccines save lives? And does this COVID vaccine truly save lives? The answer, based on all estimates since vaccinations began in January of last year, is over 500,000 additional lives have been saved. Those would have died due to COVID-19 in the absence of COVID vaccines. In this slide on the left-hand side, you can see all the cases, and this is for the Omicron variant. As you can see, the data stretches back to October of 2021 all the way through the current January of 2022. The cases, the blue lines represent those that have been vaccinated. The solid blue line is those who have been vaccinated with the booster. The dashed blue line is those without booster. And clearly, the black line is the unvaccinated folks who are seeing a large spike in cases in Omicron, while the 2 blue lines, even though they're seeing additional cases, those are not large. If you move your attention to the right of this slide, you will see the deaths. The story is very stark. The black line, unvaccinated, are dying predominantly the largest deaths, 99% of all deaths. The 2 blue lines are almost near zero, so less than 1% of the cases. So despite the cases rising in both vaccinated and unvaccinated, the difference is very clear. the blue lines have remained the same regardless of whether they got infected or not. Again, showing vaccines save lives. And the effect, if you're boosted, is 68-fold. 68-fold protection from dying. So if you're not vaccinated, not boosted, you're 68 times more likely to die from COVID-19. Are COVID vaccines safe in pregnancy? The answer is a resounding yes. We have enough evidence now after almost 300 million doses given in the United States, of which more than 30,000 pregnancies have received vaccines. Additionally, we have more than 7,000 in the VSafe pregnancy registry. All of the information and data collected thus far in various stages of pregnancy clearly show there is no harm to the mother. Additionally, the three leading organizations, the CDC, which is concerned with disease, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, which is concerned about the well-being of the mother, and the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, concerned with both the well-being of the mother and the fetus, are all unified in recommending the vaccines be offered to pregnant women. The other risks, if you are pregnant and do not get the vaccine, you are at huge risk to respiratory complications and premature birth, almost threefold increased risk compared to pregnant women who have received the vaccine. This is why this myth is not true. It is very safe in pregnancy and it's highly recommended. Unfortunately, only 40% of the pregnant population in the United States is vaccinated against COVID, compared to 60% of women in the general population vaccinated against COVID-19. We need to get those numbers up. We need to get the message out that it's very safe to give in pregnancy. This is a pervasive myth that has refused to go away and unfortunately is causing a lot of commotion in the healthcare of COVID-19 patients across the nation. Ivermectin is an antiparasitic drug used for treating parasitic infestations in both human beings and in veterinary disease in horses and other mammals. Ivermectin is not a safe drug. It's deadly and causes seizures, coma, death, and other problems. It is not and has not been proven to help as a treatment or a cure for COVID-19. There have been a couple of false studies with data that was not true and that were not published and were retracted after being put out there preprint. So the truth is both ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, which are the more famous ones. There are several others. Some people believe in some oils. Some people believe in zinc. Some people believe in vitamin D. None of these are cures, and the largest trials, especially for ivermectin, clearly show that it does not cure and is actually harmful. Same for hydroxychloroquine. On this graph, you see that uptake of both hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin increased during COVID. There is no scientific evidence to support the use of either drug. So please remember this and make sure you let folks who are misinformed know that ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine are not a cure. Another common myth is that vaccines are failing or don't work because every time the virus mutates, we get the alpha variant, the delta variant. Now we are in the Omicron variant, and you'll commonly hear that antibodies are declining, the neutralizing antibodies are declining. What this myth is based on is the fact that we're only looking at one half of the immune response, which is called the B cell response. The other half is called the T cell response, and the T cells are entirely different. They're not about antibodies. They're about destroying infected cells and also preventing the virus from getting a foothold. So in this slide, on the bottom left in the red box, you can see that the B cells are present once you give the vaccine, and they go to work making antibodies. And that's what we're measuring. And when we say on an average across all the variants, 71% after you get the vaccine still have antibodies versus it's only 42% with the Omicron. We're talking about antibodies. So that's one part, like I said, one half of the immune response. Now, if we go all the way to the right-hand side, the green box, you can see that the T cell at 6 months post-vaccination, after you receive vaccine, is remarkable. Average is 90%. With Omicron, it's 84 to 85%. And what this clearly shows, no matter which vaccine, and here we're showing messenger RNA vaccines, both Moderna and Pfizer, the Ad26 with this, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, or the new Novavax vaccine, which is currently being given to the FDA for emergency use authorization. All of these vaccines in the lab and in real-world trials have shown that they retain, at 6 months, 85% protection against Omicron, and they recognize all the variants, alpha, beta, delta, and that's what those colored bars are in both the red and the green boxes. Each colored bar is a variant. The last bar is the Omicron variant to the extreme right, clearly showing that even though we measure the antibodies are going down, the T cell response still recognized and still extremely effective, 85% effective, which is why patients who are people who are vaccinated and completed the series, they may get infection with Omicron, but they don't die. The death rate still remains the same. In other words, no matter what the variant, if you're vaccinated, you are highly unlikely to die. 99% of all deaths currently are, no matter what the variant, what the surge, are occurring among the unvaccinated. This is a huge risk if you're still not vaccinated. So vaccines work. Another common myth is natural infection is better than vaccine-mediated immunity, and natural immunity is great. The truth is, yes, natural immunity works, natural immunity is great, but it's very variable, and you cannot be sure if you have the right protection after you get an infection. There are too many factors there, and what we have found scientifically is natural infection and immunity, unfortunately, fails more often than succeeds. Well, vaccine-mediated immunity is a sure shot. It's almost a guarantee if you completed the series, and especially if you also taken the booster. So that's what this slide shows. If you look at all the red boxes, those are all the people at risk. And if you look in each of those boxes, there's a dashed horizontal line in the middle of the graph that's at number 16. And that's the threshold that we want all of these responses to be. And you can see the red bar is the extreme right in every graph is the Omicron. And that bar is below the dashed line in those red boxes, because those are the boxes in which if you start with A, it's somebody who just received the messenger RNA vaccine and they've not had the booster. In box B is someone who has had the Johnson & Johnson and 1 month after dose 2. And if you go to box E, F, and G in the red boxes, those are all folks who've had infection naturally and had natural immunity, and they're still not protected. No matter whether they got the alpha variant, the beta variant, or the delta variant, they're not protected against Omicron, as the red box shows well below the horizontal dashed line. The white boxes in the C, D, and H, those people are well protected. So in C, you have the Johnson & Johnson mixed with the messenger RNA Pfizer vaccine. In D, if you've had both Pfizer vaccines, but after dose 2 within a month. Or finally in H, if you've had the infection naturally and then vaccinated, or you were vaccinated and you had the infection naturally. So what it clearly shows is you want to complete your 2-series Moderna vaccine or Pfizer vaccine, or you want to do a combination of Johnson & Johnson and the messenger RNA vaccine, or If you're vaccinated, you're great if you've had the infection before or after, but you're not truly safe if you just had natural infection. COVID-19 is a deadly disease, much deadlier than many other diseases, and this graph illustrates how much the toll is when you compare it to all the major pandemics in the past and all the major wars in the United States. If you look at this, you can see 1918 Spanish flu, we had about 675,000 deaths in the US. World War II, 405,000 deaths. World War I, 116,000 deaths. 1968 pandemic flu, 100,000 deaths. The Vietnam conflict, 58,000 deaths. Korean War, 36,000 deaths. Operation Iraqi Freedom, 4,000 deaths. So clearly, COVID-19 has almost approaching a million deaths, 929,000 deaths. So by far, it is a major pandemic. It's causing a lot of deaths in the United States. And is the death only to the extremely old, like 85 and older, or does it affect the middle-aged folks as well? You can see in this, this is up to January of this year, 2022. And you can see total deaths about 880,000 up to January of 2022. 85 and older, about 227,000 deaths, but clearly 75 to 85, another 225,000 deaths, and then even 65 to 74, 200,000 deaths. These are folks that normally shouldn't die, should have a normal life expectancy easily of another 10 years, but they're dying earlier. And then look at the 50 to 64-year-olds. This is most Americans' prime years. They've made it financially, made it in other ways, and they should be living. 165,000 deaths. How about 40 to 49-year-olds? 38,000 deaths. That's a shocking number. That's way larger than most other diseases. So you can see that goes on down to even 30 to 39. We've had 16,000 deaths. So this is not a benign condition. It affects a large group of people, not just people who are old or older than 85. And comparing it to the flu is a mistake in several ways. The flu does cause about 30,000 deaths a year on a bad year. But overall, if you just look at the last decade or so here on this graph, clearly the blue bars are the flu deaths, the black bar is the COVID deaths, and it simply is not true. In reality, COVID is 10 times deadlier than the flu. Does COVID-19 have long-term effects? And this is one of the several reasons why when people advocate for natural infection, natural immunity, oh, just get it and get over it. Well, the risks are too much if you are just depending on natural infection to give you immunity. You could get really sick, get in the hospital, and get permanent long-term damage to your organs, or you could even die, which is why we don't advocate for that. We advocate for vaccinations. This is the correct and safest way, and also the surest way to ensure you have robust immunity against all the variants, as I've shown you in the previous slides. So the long haul syndrome, or what we called post-acute syndrome in COVID, affects up to a third of anywhere from 30 to 40% of people who get COVID, and a third of these people who get this had asymptomatic disease, so they didn't even know they had COVID-19. Another reason why you should get vaccinated, you do not want to get long COVID, which results in long-term chest pain, dyspnea, anxiety, abdominal pain, cough, low back pain, and fatigue. And this usually persists well past 2 months after the diagnosis. Children are, fortunately, don't suffer at high rates of consequences, unlike adults. The one unfortunate condition that children do develop from COVID-19 is called multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, or MISC. What this multi-system inflammatory syndrome is is it affects every single organ in the body of the child. It's a minority of children that get this, but it usually occurs 6 weeks after they have recovered from COVID-19, and it occurs in children who even had almost asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic COVID-19. Another good reason why we should vaccinate children. So far in the United States, a total of 6,851 patients have been diagnosed in the pediatric age group with MISC, or multisystem inflammatory syndrome, in children. Total deaths so far 59. And you can see the blue line here in this graph is the MISC cases. Each wave we've had several MISC cases. The worst was obviously in January, February of 2021. The dashed line, black line, is daily COVID cases. Fertility. This is a common topic and a very widely dispersed myth, which is not true. The most recent study done January of 2022, very solid study, and this is a prospective cohort study, one of the strongest studies done. What they did was actually follow couples trying to conceive. They found no meaningful association between the vaccination in either partner and fertility. This further strengthens all the evidence from animal studies, from other studies and trials. So clear evidence, scientific evidence, that you can absolutely be assured that it does not affect fertility. What's more, they also found during the studies, if these partners got the infection, it was associated with a decline in fertility in males. So COVID itself can cause fertility problems, but the vaccine does not. In fact, the vaccine protects them. So the simple takeaway is this myth is absolutely false, and there is no effect on fertility, women's or men's. So please make sure folks get the COVID vaccine. Another myth is that COVID vaccine itself causes disease. This is not true. On the left-hand side is the coronavirus itself. It's attaching to the cell at the bottom and then enters the cell, makes millions of copies of itself. On the right-hand side is the vaccine. What the vaccine does is it educates our immune system to make antibodies specifically targeting the spike protein of the virus. And you can see the virus has these spiky outcroppings, and the antibody there is shown in blue, and it attaches to the spike and does not allow the virus on the right-hand side to attach to the cell. On the left-hand side, the unvaccinated individual, the virus is free to attach to the cell, free to enter the cell, free to make millions of copies of itself. So the vaccine cannot cause a disease, because all the vaccine is teaching us to make is the antibody. It does not have any virus in it. Just the antibody we make is what's going to protect us. So the vaccine itself does not cause the disease and cannot cause the disease. Does the vaccine alter your DNA? So the DNA is the genetic makeup that informs us, the blueprint that tells us and informs our cells who we are and how we should be. The vaccine does not cause any change to our DNA. That's shown in this picture. The cell, once injected, the vaccine enters the cell. The messenger RNA is transcribed by the ribosome into making the spike protein, and then it's degraded. So all the vaccine components are completely degraded within 24 to 48 hours and no longer remain in the system. The other important thing is the messenger RNA cannot enter the nucleus, which is shown in the bottom of that picture. And our DNA is sequestered, safely stored inside the nucleus. Think of it as a bank vault. And the messenger RNA cannot enter this vault. It does not have access to the DNA. So the vaccine does not change DNA. Do kids transmit the disease? The evidence is very clear now. Initially, it was very conflicting and confusing. The best studies now clearly show, including the studies from the CDC, that kids not only transmit the disease, in fact, as shown in this picture, they become the major uh, vectors or carriers of the disease during an outbreak. So, in an outbreak, usually if it's contained within a family or within a small community by measures such as distancing, masking, it works great. Same with transmission from mother to baby. But once they get into school, these are actually proven to be the most efficient way for an outbreak to occur. In fact, COVID 19 is no different than every other outbreak that has occurred in the school setting. And COVID 19, in fact, is this super efficient spreader within the school and then immediately to the larger community, and has been shown clearly to be the reason why we get a lot of these community-wide outbreaks then taking on a larger explosive dimension or an exponential growth because of schools, not just lower schools, but higher schools, all the way through adolescence. So you're talking about K through 12 and even college. So that's it. Those are my references.